Welcome back. The saga continues following an alleged leaked audio recording of Chief Secretary Farley Augustine speaking about a supposed plot of propaganda. Today we are joined by attorney at law Martin George to give his perspective on this latest development. Mr. George, good morning.
Yeah, hi, good morning to you, Marlon, and good morning, Trinidad, and a very special good morning to Tobago.
Yes, Tobago has been in the news a lot over the past few days, Mr. George, but let's begin our discussion this way this morning. Of course, Mr. Augustine had a news conference last week, and this is what he said. He said the audio tape leaked online on May 22nd was an old recording from a closed-door strategy session. However, the strategy discussed was never executed, which clearly shows this is a government that is working. You discuss all strategies, the good, the bad, the ugly, the beautiful, indifferent, everything. You look at the possibility, you go home, you sleep on it, and you come back again. So, as I said, Mr. George, last week, Mr. Augustine would have said this. How is this going down with the population in Tobago?
Well, I would think that in terms of the population of both Trinidad and Tobago, because it's a national issue, Marlon, it's not just a Tobago issue. I think the first question that people are asking is, why would it take you 3 weeks to come out and say this? If that were the case, then that should have been your immediate response the minute that, this thing came out. And then what exacerbates the scenario is that he says that he was aware of this, some months before. So therefore, in other words, if it is that you had this information and this was brought to your attention, then you ought to have immediately, come out and said something about it rather than waiting. And, you had repeated calls. You had an editorial by the Express calling on him to clear the air. You had several commentators, myself included, calling on him to say something about it. So therefore, coming so late in the day, it really does raise more questions than answers, unfortunately.
So I think it is safe to say, Mr. George, that clearly the population in Tobago, they are not satisfied by this explanation given by the Chief Secretary.
Well, the thing is, I also saw a poll on, I think it was TV6, where, persons were asked certain questions in terms of, how they felt about it. And that poll seemed to reveal, I think, 93% of the respondents indicated that they were not satisfied with the explanation, in the sense that it seemed as if it were, an attempt to basically try to fool the population as opposed to being candid and forthright, and I mean, if that poll is accurate, then, I mean, that is indeed a damning indictment of, the explanation that was proffered. And, we have to recall, Marlon, that this was a pre-recorded session. It's not to say that you were caught off guard by questions that, persons, posited to you on the spur of the moment. You had more than ample time. You had 3 weeks to craft your response to this. And, when the response did come out, it really actually, created, I think, more of a conundrum than anything else for Mr. Augustine.
But do you think that Mr. Augustine tried to paint a picture that he was a victim in all of this, and it was all a part of a plot, as he would have described it, a plot to extort money?
Well, the thing is, I mean, that was the attempt that was made, but the point is, Marlon, as we all know the old saying, when you get in licks, don't stay in a corner quietly and take your licks. Come out in public and bawl and say something. And the reason why I think persons are looking at it askance and, questioning the credibility, and the reason why Mr. Augustine is now facing a crisis of confidence is that his response has come. It's like a case of too little, too late. You cannot say that you were the victim of this extortion plot. Where's the evidence to show that you reported this to the police, that you made attempts to, deal with it at an official level since when it first occurred. If you are saying that this occurred months ago, he also made mention of allegations of persons trying to use some, sexual escapade to try to blackmail him also. Where's the evidence that you went to the police with this and said, well, hey, listen, I am being extorted? He made broad blandishments and allegations in relation to other members of his party or his grouping, being under threat and somebody's car being damaged. And, so the thing is to come out now with all of this when these things should have been dealt with much earlier, and there ought to have been that forthrightness when persons were calling upon you to say something. It really seems to be a case of, as the Shakespearean play that said, methinks thou dost protest too much.
So this is not a matter that has been laid to rest. That's one. And number two, can this be repaired by Mr. Augustine and the THA?
Well, the thing is, one day in politics is a very long time. So therefore, there is the chance to recover and repair it. But the point is the credibility gap that he has created for himself. He needs to start repairing that immediately. And that can only be built back over time. He has to now try to win back the trust of persons, because I can tell you, Marlon, and that's why I say it's not just a Tobago issue. I have had calls from dozens of persons, very influential persons in Trinidad, who they had such high hopes for Mr. Augustine. And, they've called me and they've said, but Martin, what is happening? We thought that this was going to be different. We thought Mr. Augustine was setting a new tone. If you recall, when they were campaigning, they actually put out a code of conduct, which I think he was very strident and very forthright about, that he said, if any member breaches this code of conduct, they will be dealt with severely. And here you have a scenario which has unraveled, and it appears that, persons were discussing plans which I think must clearly be in breach of that code of conduct, and you almost flirting on the edges of what might appear to be a conspiracy to defraud the public purse. So therefore, there are things that I think he really has to now deal with, and deal with in a forthright manner to try to build back that sense of confidence that persons would have wanted to repose in him from the start.
Yeah. Mr. George, I don't know if you would have had a chance to glance the Daily Express this morning, but there's a story from the Prime Minister where it says, Farley not to be trusted, no more one-on-ones, and the Prime Minister speaks of the issue of the vacancy for the Chief Administrator. He also responded to Augustine's Nancy story, according to the Prime Minister, which, among other things, involved an allegation that two senior ministers gave him $100 million to give their friend in Tobago. This issue of the Chief Administrator, is it an issue for Tobagonians?
Well, it's a big issue, because remember, the chief administrator is your chief accounting officer. And if you recall, every year when the Auditor General gives the report, there are always issues as to the accountability, the transparency, the record keeping, the bookkeeping, and the fact that the THA appears to be on a frolic of its own as regards the public expenditure. In fact, just recently before the Joint Select Committee, there were some persons from the THA who appeared there, and, from all appearances, they did not acquit themselves adequately in terms of the answers and the questions that were put to them and the information that was requested. In fact, I think you had members coming out publicly from that committee and saying that, look, they were disappointed in the lack of preparedness and the lack of answers. So therefore, now that you have no substantive chief administrator who is supposed to be the chief public servant in Tobago. So basically, that's somebody at the level of a permanent secretary. You ask yourself, how are things being done? And is it that you have persons now usurping the authority of the chief administrator and arrogating unto themselves powers which they do not have and which they ought not to be exercising? It is a very serious issue, the lack of a chief administrator.
Yeah. Mr. George, some people may say, what is wrong with this THA administration? Is it an issue of inexperience? Is it an issue that, it's young people, give them a chance? What is the issue concerning the administration, the THA administration?
Well, the thing is, one of the things that, I'm always a student of history, and I love, reading about, persons who are successful, and, people like Steve Jobs and, Bill Gates and, these guys, they always say that what they do is you surround yourself with persons who are wiser than you, who are able to give you proper advice. I remember having a conversation a couple of years ago with Arthur Lockjack, and Arthur told me, he said, Martin, he said, listen, for most of my companies, I myself don't even know, how to run those companies. He said, but I hire people who know what they are doing, and they run the companies for me, and they make the money for me. So therefore, you must at some point recognize that you need to have a cadre of good, reliable advisors who would not just be coming to you and bowing and scraping obsequiously before you and saying, well, yes, boss, you are the best boss, you are the greatest boss, and just simply agreeing as yes men, because they simply want to win your favor. You have to have persons who are, robustly intelligent, robustly independent, and who have the courage and the testicular fortitude to be able to tell you, hey, listen, no, that's wrong. What you're doing there isn't correct because you are going to get into trouble. This is the correct thing to do. This is the way you should approach it. But if you only surround yourself with persons who are, fawning before you and, bowing and scraping and, just telling you, yes, everything is good and you are doing a fantastic job, then obviously you will never get proper advice and you will end up in the bramble that you are in right now, where basically you are impaled on the horns of a dilemma.
Yeah. You see how Mr. George is? I asked Mr. George that question, and you see Mr. George described himself robustly intelligent and to give strong advice and so on. Mr. George, as always, it's always a pleasure speaking to you, and thank you very much for your perspective this morning.
Yes, and the thing is, it's unfortunate that, this THA administration has ended up being hoisted upon its own petard, because they're the ones who claimed that they're going to come out and do things differently. They came out with a code of ethics and everything that, gave the impression that things would be different. But it appears that the more things change, the more they remain the same.
As always, Mr. George, thank you very much. Bye for now.